Is it because of the game itself? Is it because of how players experience the game? Is it avoidable or is it simply inevitable? I asked it to my community. Hey everyone, welcome to Sevy Talks, where we cover a range of topics from Genshin Impact to gaming to guests and stories. I'm Sevy, and thank you for tuning in. And this is officially our first episode of this newly launched podcast, newly launched and out of the womb. And what better way to start a new thing than by talking about burnout? Genshin Burnout is a phrase that gets invoked or thrown around a lot within the Genshin community, whether on Twitter or maybe you've heard your favorite content creator talk about it, or maybe you've seen the load of Reddit posts and threads about it. Like, you hear it everywhere, basically, if you're a Genshin player who engages a lot with Genshin on social media as well. But then I got curious about it. I felt like I wasn't really clear on how other people were experiencing it, or if other people were able to completely avoid it. Is it because of the game itself? Is it because of how players experience the game? Is it avoidable or is it simply inevitable? And so I wanted to have a conversation about it. And in order for this to not just be me like philosophizing to myself or being in my own brain echo chamber kind of thing, I asked it to my community. I asked my Discord community what they thought of Burnout in Genshin Impact. I asked my Twitch chat what their experiences were. And I asked through a YouTube community post if people were feeling excited about 3.8 and 4.0, or were they still playing the game, or are they on a break and how do they feel about it? And thankfully, there were a lot of great responses that came in that gave me a lot of insight and understanding to how different people are experiencing it. And I wanted to share that with you in this episode so that we can explore and break down and discuss all of that together here. So before we get started into the meat of things, I'm curious about your story. I'm curious about how you feel about it or your take on it. If you're watching this on YouTube, feel free to put it in the comments. Or if you're listening on Spotify, then maybe let me know through any of my other media channels. Okay, so I think the first thing we need to establish is what is burnout? When we talk about burnout, it's usually in referring to something that we used to enjoy, but no longer do. Something that has become a chore to do, like a chore to continue, and yet for some reason or whatever reason, we make ourselves continue it. I think that the literal image of burnout is that you had a flame for something or you had a fire for something, and after a long period of time of keeping that fire going, it's no longer going. It burned out, it's fizzled out, and now you're having a hard time reviving it, or maybe there's no chance of reviving it at all. But when it comes to Genshin Impact, sometimes distinctions need to be made. Like, is burnout being the same as being bored of the game? Or is burnout the same as being disappointed in the game? Is burnout the same as hating the game? In my opinion, burnout is definitely not the same as hating the game. In fact, I think a lot of people who experience burnout in Genshin Impact are those who love the game, but can't find themselves to want to play it or can't make themselves want to play it for several or different reasons. Burnout is separate from just being bored of the game because let's say if you were just bored of the game, then you could very easily leave it or you could very easily set it aside. But if you're burnt out of it, then there must be some element of, but you don't want to set it aside or you don't want to leave it. Like you're bored of it, but this and this and that. So I think burnout is like a mix of different things, and it also comes from a mix of different experiences, which I want to tackle next. In people sharing their experiences of burnout with me, I've come to find that a lot of it has to do with how different players experience the game, what aspect of the game the player focuses on. I'm not saying that every player can really be put into a box regarding this, or not every player just focuses on one aspect of the game, right? But it does make sense that how you relate to the game also affects how the game affects you. So, what type of player are you, or what relationship do you have with the game? And has it affected whether or not you're burnt out of it right now? For example, artifact farmers and the character builders and those who like to tackle Spiral Abyss, there is a set of players that are concentrated on spending their resin efficiently and building their characters as best as possible. Maybe these are also the players that hate wasting resin or hate overcapping their resin or hate wasting resources within the game, period. First of all of these types of players or all of these aspects of players are totally valid. I'm not out here to criticize anyone because I could easily fall into any of them, right? So, in my opinion, as someone who was and to some extent still is an artifact farmer, it's kind of easy to get burned out of it because, again, like the artifact RNG, it's terrible, right? It's not satisfying except for like one out of 1,000 times when you suddenly get all the substats you want rolled into your level 20 piece. It's terrible. It's not gratifying. In fact, most of the time it's pretty disappointing. So let's say that all you're doing in the game is spending your resin on more and more artifacts, and you only get like one good artifact a week, or maybe even one good artifact a month. Well, it's easy to imagine how you're going to feel after months of unsatisfying outcome. Another type of player I encountered, interestingly, were the exploration people. And these are the people who make an insane effort to 100% their maps. I'm definitely not an exploration person. My Sumeru deserts are like under 50% or something because I'm just not a fan of the desert. But I am very impressed by the people out there who have 100% exploration, especially in the new Sumeru maps. My community players who identify with this type of player or this niche of player, they said that exploration is actually very satisfying. Like, it's very satisfying to them to get into all the nooks and crannies of the map and to get that exploration percent higher and higher. They said that it's not always rewarding because, like, chests sometimes they don't feel like they're big enough for the amount of effort you go through in unlocking them. Or like the chests when you get to Inazuma or Sumeru, they feel stingier than when you were unlocking chests back in Mondstadt and Liyue. So yeah, not always super rewarding, but in a lot of ways very satisfying. Genshin is, after all, an open world game. I can understand that exploration is very fun. For me, it's a little bit overbearing, but for those who enjoy the challenge of exploration, it's great. Um, I think though that I have encountered players who also feel burnt out from trying to keep up with exploration though. Like I have a community member, Ark. He mentioned that he hasn't started the desert areas in Sumeru yet because it looks like there's so much to cover. And I have to agree, the Sumeru deserts, they are massive. And I saw this a lot in my YouTube comments too, that they feel like it was so overwhelming that they can't get themselves to start even. Sometimes starting is the hardest part because it's so intimidating. Like that's a lot of time commitment once you start. And when maybe you're the type of person that once you start something, it's hard to stop it because you've started this process and you just want to see it through. And to commit a lot of time to those huge desert and underground areas can be very, very intimidating. So it's always a little bit hard when like things start to feel overwhelming. I think over being overwhelmed is another key part of a burnout experience. On the other hand, I have another community member, Methuselah, who said that they got burnt out of Genshin after completing all the exploration. And to me, that speaks about how exploration is the most appealing thing to them, and the other stuff just doesn't interest them as much. And interest is another key thing that we're going to get back to later. Another part of, or another type of player that you might be is maybe a lore buff or maybe a story quest enjoyer, someone who focuses on the story content and world building content of Genshin, not necessarily in the exploration sense, but maybe in the storytelling and theoretical sense. Um, However, the difference I find between story quests and exploration in Genshin is that players are more or less forced to go through story quests. Sometimes they have to go through a story quest to unlock a certain area in the map. or to even unlock certain resources or other events that lead to resources in the map. Like a lot of Sumeru rainforest area is actually locked by the Aranara quest line. So those are exploration elements that are locked behind quests. And then when it gets to weekly bosses, those are also locked by story quests. The Raiden boss is locked by A's Part 2 story quest. The Scaramouche boss locked by the Archon quest of Sumeru. The new Apep boss locked by Nahida's Act 2 quest. Things like that. So it's not just story quest enjoyers and lore buffs that experience the story quests, but every player as well. And my point here is that I've seen a lot of people talking about how going through the quests and the quest dialogue burns them out because it becomes a negative experience. First of all, because it's forced and they don't really want to do it, but find themselves having to do it in order to unlock certain things. Second of all, because of certain quality of life elements that they are lacking. For example, a skip button. So many people want a skip button. The fact that some quests are unvoiced, so it doesn't feel as engaging to experience, go through. Um, and then there's the writing, where the dialogue of Genshin can become so verbose. Like perhaps this is a localization issue. And the thing is, like for Genshin players who are playing Honkai Star Rail, they see such a sharp contrast in the storytelling or the dialogue writing of it all. All right. So basically, there's a lot to unpack here. And I might revisit it in a future episode. In fact, it's likely that I will revisit it in a future episode. Um, but the main thing is, story quests have unfortunately become a common denominator in a lot of people's accounts of burnout. It makes me a little bit sad because Genshin has promising lore, but the presentation of it doesn't always come through. Okay, even personally, like when I was going through the Caverna quest, I had a hard time finishing it because even though I liked the exploration and I liked the characters involved, it was hard for me to get through, or I felt like I was wading through a lot of information that I, for some reason, was not able to comprehend. And I think it's because when it came to the Caverna quest, the Paris were trying to explain things in their own terms through their own perspective and using their own words. And these concepts or words that they were using, I either missed the explanation for them pretty badly or I just didn't get it. Like maybe my attention span failed me and I didn't really know what they were talking about in the moment, or I didn't really understand how they related to our current knowledge of things. Suffice to say, it was nice. I felt like I was happy to be done with it, but I didn't enjoy it as much as I wish I had. I think another important aspect of what can affect how you experience burnout is also how you as a player treat the time you spend on the game. Like, this doesn't necessarily relate to whether you're interested in meta or exploration or lore or story quests or whatever. This is more about how you feel about the time you set aside for it. For example, is Genshin your break time? Maybe you're the kind of person who logs into the game when they are taking a lunch break or when they're done with work and only spend like 15 to 30 minutes at a time on it. A lot of people say that Genshin's target population is actually the working population who enjoys these games as a very side thing. They play the game in order to take a break from work. Maybe Genshin is just their means to relax. On the other hand, there are gamers who love to set aside hours at a time for Genshin. Maybe they go for hours at a time so that they can accomplish as many tasks in it as possible. Maybe they just love the game a lot that much. Maybe they just aren't able to play for long periods of time. For example, my sister, when she plays Genshin, she said that she just logs in and plays whenever she has time or whenever her work allows. She doesn't have a problem if she doesn't log in for several days. She's like, if resin is capped for a week, then it's not her problem. On the other hand, Genshin can be routine. Like Genshin can be part of your routine. I have a Twitch chatter, Jigrabble, who said that to them, it's like taking a bath or brushing your teeth. You try to do it every day, but if you miss a day, sometimes it's no biggie. So Genshin can be like your break time. It can be your relax time, but also Genshin can be work. I know that a lot of streamers who have gotten burnt out of Genshin is because they do stream it for hours at a time. And if you stream every day, then that's a lot of hours playing Genshin straight. And I don't think there's enough content in the game that can actually allow you that can actually keep things fresh enough for you if you're doing it for that long, for that often. So, given that there are these different types of players who spend different amounts of time on the game, you would probably conclude that, okay, so those who play it less don't get burnt out, or those who log in less often don't get burnt out compared to those who spend hours and hours on it. And that is a logical conclusion to come to, but that's not necessarily true, or it's not necessarily the case all the time. One of my mods, Resnilium, said that to them, Genshin was a routine. And routines can be good. Like, routines can help you keep your schedule going. It can be relieving to have a routine break, and that routine break being a game. But he also said that even though it was a routine for him, breaking out of that routine was refreshing. Maybe it's not directly like mentioning burnout, but let's say that you kept continuing or going on that routine, even though it maybe wasn't helping you anymore, then that is like one path to burnout. Another one of my mods, Valid, he says that no matter how bored I am, it feels like I always have to log in and do my dailies. So you can imagine that even though dailies don't take all that much time, on average they probably take like 15 to 30 minutes or maybe even less if it's a very easily daily, right? Because there is an element of obligation, or because there's an element of having to keep doing it, whether it's a chore or it starts to feel like work, then yeah, that can lead to burnout. So with all these experiences and aspects and factors in mind, I realized that there are kind of these two core reasons for why burnout happens. So the first core reason is that the player has finished all the content that they're interested in, but then still force themselves to continue to log in. And maybe that's because of resin. Maybe it's because of sunk cost fallacy. If you're not familiar with what sunk cost is, I'll give you an example. So let's say that you buy a movie ticket, you watch the movie, and you realize, like, within the first 15 minutes that you don't actually like the movie. Like, it's a bad movie, and you don't want to keep watching it. But you force yourself to keep watching it because you already bought the ticket. And if you leave now, then you've essentially wasted your money on the ticket. Now, that is the feeling of sunk cost, but the reason why it's usually followed up with the word fallacy is because if you're in that situation, your reaction might be, or your solution might be, that you will watch the rest of the movie in order to not waste the money you spent on the movie ticket. Maybe that will make your sunk cost worth it. But that is a fallacy, because by continuing to watch a movie that you don't want to watch, you're actually sinking even more into it. You're not sinking more money into it, but you're sinking more time into it. And that kind of just ends up being an even bigger sunk cost. I think that sunk cost fallacy is something that could often make a player feel like they have to keep playing Genshin, or that they have to keep logging into the game. You know, maybe the player has spent a lot of time into it already, or spent a lot of money into it even. And in order to feel like that time or money isn't wasted, they just keep playing the game. But like, to me, that is part of going through the fallacy, because if you just keep playing the game even though you don't enjoy it, then you're simply sinking more and more time into it, and then it becomes a vicious cycle that becomes even harder to break out of. So that's reason number one. They finished all the content they're interested in, but then they keep going back in order to feel like they haven't wasted something. The second reason is because the player feels behind on content that is piled up and up and up. and it feels intimidating to commit through to get through that content. And this is something that I definitely brought up earlier, especially when it comes to exploration. Sumeru has so much to explore. It is massive. And if you're someone who gets intimidated by a lot of content that has piled up, well, Sumeru is definitely not doing you any favors in that regard. I have a commenter on YouTube who said that up until the chasm, they were caught up with the patch content, such as World Quest and then the exploration. But then when Sumeru came around, it really took a lot out of them, and they're not even close to completing it, and they're not even sure if they can do that when it gets to Fontaine. This doesn't have to be like a blanket statement. Again, like the factor of interest is there. Maybe you are all caught up in your Spiral Abyss, but your story quest content has piled up. And and that is definitely my case. My story quest content has piled up, and I don't really want to do it. And the longer it stays there undone, the less and less and less I want to do it. And then personally, we are entering the version 3.8, which has a limited time map. And limited time maps actually tend to stress me out because I feel like I have to finish them within the limited time, obviously, because they're going to be gone afterwards. But that time limit does stress me out a bit. Even though I'm not someone who tries to complete the exploration, it just stresses me out that that thing isn't going to be permanent, and that if I miss out on the full experience now, then I'm never going to be able to get it again. And that's probably like the definition of FOMO, or that's FOMO hitting me pretty hard. So yeah, I'm definitely a victim to it as well. On the other hand, my sister, who I was talking about earlier, who just logs in whenever, she still gets burnout, even though she doesn't try to log in every day, even though she just logs in whenever. And she was telling me this, and I had to ask why. She said that she gets stressed by combat events because she just prefers enjoying the open world. In fact, she said her favorite thing to do in Genshin is to just wander aimlessly around the world. But then when combat events come around, she feels obligated to do it for the rewards and the primo gems. Like, it feels like a constant deluge of events, is what she said. And I can definitely understand that feeling. You know, if she is interested in wandering around Genshin, I'm interested in combat. What wears her down is combat, and what wears me down are story quests and to some extent exploration. So there's a lot of that when content tends to pile up. And I think something that compounds that effect is one thing I experience whenever like a new story quest or a new area or a new Archon quest, especially when those come out or when those are fresh. I feel pressured to do them right away because if I don't, I get spoiled on social media. And because I am a content creator, I do try to keep in touch with the community as much as possible, whether through Discord or Twitter. Sometimes, yeah, I browse Reddit. Definitely, I lurk on YouTube a lot too. I watch a lot of YouTube Genshin content. And whenever something new comes out, like, it's very hard to not get spoiled. So, my solution to avoid getting spoiled is like, okay, I have to do this right away. But sometimes I don't want to do it right away. So, it's that kind of like back and forth where it's like, okay, I want to be up to date with this community. I want to talk about the things they're talking about as well, but I kind of don't want to play this part of the game right now. So yeah, there are different things that can intimidate a player or make them feel like they have to catch up to something, even though they don't really want to, at the moment at least. And those are the two main reasons I've found. Now, you don't necessarily have to belong to one of them only. It can definitely be a combination of both. You know, maybe you have finished all the content you're interested in. Maybe you feel like there's more content that's just piling up more and more and more. And either way, it's not making you feel great about continuing to play the game. Another thing that I keep hearing, which doesn't directly fall under one of the two reasons that I laid out, is the disappointment. Is some disappointment that players have been feeling because they feel like their feedback isn't being listened to with regards to the game and the devs and stuff. Here's one comment that I felt put it really well. I kind of feel burned out in a weird way after playing Honkai Star Rail because it feels like such a downgrade to go back and play Genshin, where all the features that we have been asking for over the years aren't being put into. So instead of the quality of life features we've been asking, we Genshin players have been wanting going into Genshin, they go into Honkai Star Rail. And Bloopsor, the commenter, said that this kills my mood to invest time into the game, especially when it feels like the developers seemingly despise the players and just use their feedback for new projects instead of what the players are supporting. Now, we obviously don't know what is happening behind the scenes, like with the team or with the devs or where they are allocating resources and stuff, but I definitely understand how the experience of a disappointed player. Maybe Hoyoverse is going to put those improvements in Genshin at some point, but they're definitely not communicating it to us that it's going to happen anytime soon. So unless, like, for example, they raise some hope that it will happen anytime soon, I'm sure that players who feel this way will continue feeling that way until they're proven wrong, if they're ever proven wrong. So, yeah, I definitely relate to that. I think a lot of players resonate with that, especially those who have tried Honkai Star Rail. So, because there's a lot of experiences with burnout, or because there's a lot of things that can lead up to burnout in the game, depending on how you experience it, how much time you spend on it, whether content is piling up, or whether you're still interested in things, or whether you're like disappointed in how the current state of the game is. I was wondering, is it inevitable to get burnt out in Genshin, or is it avoidable? um, I think that it's not really a question how to relieve burnout in Genshin because like the easy answer is to just take a break and just try to say stop to whatever FOMO is going to come your way and let and free yourself from like the emotions of FOMO and sunk costs and things like that. Um like FOMO is great for keeping players coming back and interested, but it can definitely make players resent having to keep coming back. But it was fun talking to players who actually haven't experienced burnout at all. And some of these players have been playing for quite a while. Some of them said that they aren't burnt out because they already took a break. Maybe they were burnt out before, or maybe they just took a break before they decided that they would wait around until they got burned out. There are players who when they encounter a quote unquote dry patch or quote unquote filler patch, instead of feeling burnt out and disappointed that the patch is dry or filler, they just take it as a nice break in order to focus on other games or maybe to focus on building characters that they haven't built yet and just enjoy some breathing room. I'll know a lot of my comments feel that way about the current 3.8 because it's like the calm before Fontaine comes around. Some said that they are not burnt out because they don't feel any obligation and they just enjoy Genshin as a game, as a means of relaxing. Like one of my chatters, Temperance Plays Genshin, said it's mainly a feeling of very strong love for the game, its characters, and its side stories. Like it's an emotional connection, and that if they don't play daily, they end up missing the characters in the world. And that is one thing that I actually personally resonate with. It doesn't completely make me avoid burnout because I have been burnt out, but I definitely resonate with the emotional attachment to the game because there are characters there that I very deeply simp for. I'll hate them. And I have experienced actually missing the game and the characters if I don't log in for several days, which I have done. Yes, I have skipped several days of login. And then other players have also learned how just simply how to pace themselves. One of them said that they just do things slowly at their own pace, even if the map is big, even if Sumeru might look overwhelming. They didn't force themselves to explore areas as soon as they came out. They just kind of went along whenever they were ready to. And I think pacing is a very important factor. Not everyone can pace themselves. I know that I'm very bad at pacing myself. I'm like a procrastinator at heart, and it's a habit that I'm trying to break out of. Don't procrastinate, kids. But yeah, pacing is something that can definitely help if you're good at doing it. So there are a lot of players who have found ways to circumvent burnout or to just avoid it altogether, whether through their own self control or just how they view the game in general. And I think that this is, well, for me, this was a nice way to like reflect on how I view the game because it definitely reduces the amount of stress I have if I can like separate myself from burnout and to take a different perspective or to like reframe my relationship to the game so that I can like reduce any negative emotions that happen whenever I experience burnout there. So, with that being said, I know that a bunch of you have asked me, do I experience burnout? Have I experienced burnout? At this point, I've already said several times that, yeah, I have experienced burnout. Um, However, that was some time ago. Right now, I'm not really burnt out of the game. I do get bored of the game, but I'm not burnt out. And the difference being, I don't force myself to log in when I don't want to, and I don't resent the feeling of not logging in. I don't really have negative emotions tied to being bored of the game anymore. I used to. I used to force myself to. There were definitely times, I think, before Honkai Star Rail came out, that I got burned out of streaming Genshin. And it was kind of hard for me to accept that or to think that because sometimes it's hard to admit that you can get tired of something you love. And the thing is, I create Genshin content because I love Genshin Impact. Like, I really love the game. Um, so sometimes it's tough to admit that, yeah, you can love the game, but you can also be tired of it. You can be bored of it. You can even be disappointed or mad at it. And I'm sure that sounds like a very parasocial way of viewing the game right now, but like it happens, and that's been my experience. I am at peace with the fact that I don't log in every day, but I have to remember that Genshin is work. Like to me, Genshin is work. Content creation is my livelihood right now. So what I do in the game, I make sure that I build characters well enough for testing, to do Spiral Abyss, to test team comps whenever a new character comes out. Like that is my job for my YouTube Genshin guide videos. When it comes to streaming, I have a job to deliver content. Now I have more of a choice whether to do Genshin or Star Rail or like take a chance and do a little variety. But if you're a content creator, you know how hard that can be sometimes. But when it comes to streaming, I do have to deliver content and I want that content to be good. And I did mention this earlier that sometimes I get overwhelmed by the buildup of story quests because I try to save those for streams. I feel like if I don't do a story quest or an important major event in Genshin on stream, then it feels like I wasted the content by doing it off stream. But like the paradox of that is sometimes I don't want to do it on stream. So I just end up procrastinating it more and more. And then I end up forcing myself to stream myself cramming the event or cramming the story quest. Right now, I take it as something that I can just improve on or something that I can just take it as fact or whatever. I don't really feel bad about it. Maybe I will so at some point in the future, but right now I'm like all good. I think that what as I was making the outline or putting together all of the comments and experiences for this episode, more than anything, I was kind of surprised at the variety of ways people like to encounter the game. I think that as a content creator, I tend to get a little bit isolated, which is a bit ironic, right? Because I spend a lot of time with my Twitch chat and I have a lot of YouTube commenters like commenting things about the videos and things like that. Um, but I sometimes do tend to get a little bit isolated, and if I'm not asking the right questions, then I'll never know. And I am glad that I asked my communities on the different platforms how they feel about burnout because personally, it gave me a lot of insight on the different experiences that people had with it or the different things that people love about Genshin. So I hope that you enjoyed listening to those different things. That's going to be all from me for today. I'm already cooking up the next episode where I'm going to have special guest Ashikai, lore Genshin YouTuber, and we're going to talk about lore, content, her approach to things, and more. Thank you for tuning in, and I will see you soon. Take care.